table as well. It looks like they're probably going to present this together. It's on the Outdoor Heritage Fund appropriations, and then we're also going to have Mark Johnson from the Lessard Sams as well. So come on up. Senator Herr, are you going to go through the bill, or are you going to have Mr. Johnson go through it?
Mr. Johnson will go through it. Mr. Chairs, I also want to thank you for agreeing to hear this bill, Senate File 770. And 770 is this year Outdoor Heritage Bill, and I'm pleased to have Senator Lane as co-author to this bipartisan bill, as we also serve as member of the Outdoor Heritage Council. I will give a little brief history of the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and Senator Lane will highlight our community activity during interim, and then we'll pass to Mr. Mark Johnson to talk about the bill itself. Members, the Outdoor Heritage Fund is one of the 4 funds under legacy and passed by voters in 2007 to amend our state constitution on clean water, land, and legacy. The Outdoor Heritage Fund ratio of 33% of the legacy dollars is to restore, protect, and enhance wetlands, prairies, forests, and habitat for fish and game and wildlife. The fund is recommended annually by 12 members of the Lessard Sam Outdoor Heritage Council. Of the 12 members, 2 are Senate members, 2 are House members, 4 citizens appointed by the governors, 2 citizens appointed by the House, and 2 appointed by the Senate. This is the 17th year of the Outdoor Heritage proposal that comes before us today, and will continue annually until 2034. In the 17 years, 4.3 billion is requests. 4.3 billion in requests were reviewed and received by the Lessard Sam Outdoor Heritage Council. So far, over 1.3 million acres of Minnesota wildlife habitat has already been restored, enhanced, and protected. In addition, the conservation partner legacy of the Outdoor Heritage Council funded over 1,000 grants, restoring over 585,000 acres of land. This is a summary of the history of the outdoor heritage. As we also thank Representative Bob Lessard and Senator Dallison and legislators at that time for their leadership to get us this far. So I'll pass to my co-author, Senator Lane.
Well, thank you, Senator Lang. And I do need to mention that we do have a quorum. I was remiss in mentioning that. So go ahead, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Herr, for allowing me to get up here and pontificate about a ginormous bill that we work on every year. So the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council gets about mid-50s of applications every year. I think we actually had 2. Did we have 2 3-ring binders this year, or was it just the 1? I can't remember. And if you'd allow me, if you could pass that down, I'll start going through line by line, because we only spend, we start early April, I believe, give or take, depending on the year and when we get our meetings organized, and we start digging through all of these applications. The council as a whole looks at these applications on how do they meet the intent of the legislature? How do they meet the intent of that constitutional amendment, right? Restore, enhance, protect. How do we do that? Each one of these groups that comes in offers their version of how they're going to attack that issue. How are we going to restore some certain property? How are we going to enhance some other properties that we do already own or may own in the future as a state? And then how do we protect these, right? How do we make pill payments? How do we make sure that this property is protected in perpetuity, and we make it, worthwhile for the locals that are having it? So I've been on this council for 8 years. I've been in the legislature for 9. I can't believe it's been that long. It went awfully fast. In that 8 years, I think the council has done something that most other councils probably haven't done. And that's, they provide you guys with a bill that we don't mess with. We've left it alone because of, I think, the bipartisan nature of the work we do, the way that we dig into that 3-ring binder, because if we don't dig into it, you guys are going to start asking questions. And realistically, as of recent, we've really done a much better job of following up on some of the projects, done a really good job on making sure that some of these proposals that have money hanging or have projects that are outstanding, we say, hey, why don't you come and talk to us about what you haven't got done yet? Because we're about to, possibly give you more money. How do we as a council make sure that you are fulfilling the intent on what you said you were going to do and what as a council we think you should be doing? So with that, Mr. Chair, I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Johnson. And, it's pretty odd not to have Bob here testifying on this bill, I have to admit. When I first got put to the board, Senator Ingebrigtsen had stepped down, and this little man that I had never met before came wandering into my office and sat down, didn't introduce himself, and just started talking about hunting and fishing. And I think realistically, when it comes to this bill and when it comes to Lessard Sam's, it really means, that's what it means, outdoor heritage, hunting, fishing. How do we protect our lands? So with that, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and members, for the record, my name is Mark Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. And also, members behind me, the good-looking young man in the first row is Tom Rebman. He is Lessard Sam's Commission Assistant. And I wanted to thank him personally today because you've all heard that when you go on safari, you need a gun bearer. I needed a binder bearer because I've got some load restrictions the doctor has given me. So Tom was kind enough to help me bring that over, and I always like to have it along because we've got reference then. Also, we have two other staff. There's only 4 staff at Lessard Sam's. Sandy Smith is our program analyst manager, and Joe Pavelko is our assistant director. They could not be here today, so but I wanted to thank them also on the record. Mr. Chair and members, what my goal here is to bring you through the bill kind of as an overview, a 30,000-foot view, and we can burrow down deeper as you would like. We'll answer questions on it. I do have an overview of the bill that we'll go through. It's a handout that you have in front of you. It's this color one. So if I can have you refer to that, and then after that, we'll jump right into the bill where I've got a couple of specific things to bring up your attention to at the bill, and then we can go to question and answer. So the front page of this, really, I'm going to let you just look at that at your leisure. It's really highlights of the bill as it stands. And the bill is, again, the recommendations for funding from the Outdoor Heritage Fund that have come to you by way of the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. If we open this thing up to the middle, you'll see that the left-hand page, it's 2 very similar pages. The left-hand side is a view of how the outputs happen by acres, and the right-hand side is how they happen by funding. So giving you a couple different perspectives across the state of how this funds, how this $168 million worth of project recommendations actually happen. If we go to the left-hand side, the output by acres, the top you see on the left side, you see that big pie chart. And it gives you an idea from an acre standpoint, where does the activity happen? And the activity, I mean, is restoration, protection, or enhancement of public lands for the protection of game, fish, and wildlife, and as this goes on here now. And that you can see that there's enhancement is the big blue portion. It's 78% of the acres this year. There's 106,778 acres that we anticipate will be affected, touched by this appropriation. Of that, about just under 83,000 we anticipate will be enhanced, and about 11,000 that will be protected by easement. Protected in fee without pilt would be about 4,000. Protected in fee with pilt, about 2,485. And then restored will be about another 6,000 coming up to the total. But that's from a pie chart standpoint. Let's go down one more rung to where you can see distribution of acres by ecological section. So Minnesota is broken up into 5 areas or 5 ecological sections, as the council refers to them. And that's depicted in the map at the very top center of this brochure. You can see the map there. It's got northern Minnesota, or pardon me, northern forest, the forest prairie transition, prairie area, southeast forest, et cetera, the urbanizing area. Those are the 5 ecological sections. In this middle left distribution, you see how the acres distribute between those areas. So if you're really concerned about the southeast forest, you can take a look at that silo and you can see that, boy, the activity down there is primarily going to be enhancement or it's going to be protecting an easement. And there's only 1,735 acres that are going to happen in that corner of the state, in the southeast corner. On the other hand, if you're interested in metro or urban, there's 2,900 acres and plus. Or if you're interested in prairies, there's 47,750 acres that are going to be affected. And you can see the distribution. Now, that's a rough chart, as just because that's the way charts are, but it gives you an idea, at least from an activity standpoint, how they break out. And in the very bottom, we get a chance to dissect this a little bit differently, put it under a different microscope, and how the acres work by resource type. And by resource type, I mean wetlands, prairies, forests, or habitats. And then how they break out from an acre standpoint, how the restoration breaks out between those four resource types, or how the enhancement breaks out, or the fee title acquisition with PILT or without PILT, et cetera. So it gives you hopefully a granular look from at least three different perspectives of the acres. The right side of this page, you see it's all the same thing, but by funding. So you get, again, that granular view on three different aspects with regards to the amount of money going into each activity, or into each ecological section, or into each resource type, the wetlands, prairies, forests, or habitats. It's a lot to swallow all at one time, and I don't expect you to. I do want to make sure that you know, if you have questions, if anybody has questions about projects or about an eco section or about a activity, all you have to do is ask, and we will get you the answers. And we'll keep trying. We kind of live to answer your questions at the Lessard Sam staff. So we really look forward to that. On the back of this brochure, I'll call your attention to that now, the very last page. And that actually is a rundown of the bill. It directly relates to how the bill is built. Subdivision 2, you see at the top, is prairies. There are 10 projects for $34.199 million. And those projects are listed there in A through J. Those subdivisions 2A through 2J are in the bill. They're pages 2 through 6 of the bill. Subdivision 3, the forests, is pages 6 through 8 of the bill. And you can see those projects. Again, subdivision 4 is wetlands, pages 9 through 11 of the bill. Subdivision 5 is habitats. And habitats is kind of ones that don't fit neatly into one or the other. So that's pages 11 through 19 of the bill. And then the end of the bill really comes down to the administrative, subdivision 6, 7, 8, and so on. This portion of it, it kind of gives you a nice thumbnail, so you don't have to page through the entire bill to know where a specific project is. So if you look at this and you say, golly, I really want to find out what that subdivision 4G is, the big swamp north, that really sounds weird. You can go to subdivision 4 of the bill, you'll find it. Contact me or my staff. We will walk you through it. We'll get you the accomplishment plan so you know who's doing the work, where they're doing it, why they're doing it, what they're doing, everything. Likewise with Nelson Slough, that's another odd one, or the Fall River Restoration, which is subdivision 5R. There's unique projects in all corners of the state and all across the state in this bill, and we will be happily walk you through them. Mr. Chair, I'd like to slip to the bill itself right now, if I may. And members, if I can call you to the very second to last page of the bill. I think it's, 25, starting on line 25.3 is subdivision 10 of the bill. And on this last page are this is beyond the funding recommendations. These are other recommendations that have come to the council for your come from the council for your consideration. In the carry forwards of subdivision 10, 10A is actually a recommended 1-year extension to Big Rivers, or Metro Big Rivers appropriation from 2020 that is for them to finish a trout stream restoration. They may have it done by this June when their appropriation ends, by this June 30th, but there's always that worry of weather And weather is always a big thing when you're working on riparian areas. So it allows them one more year, just in case there's some weather stuff, to make sure it's done. You want trout streams done right, or you don't even want to start them, because they're so, they're just fragile. And this is a metro trout stream. The 10B is actually a recommended one-year extension to the St. Louis River Estuary Restoration Initiative from their 2020 appropriation. And that is for the same thing. I don't know if it's trout stream, but it is to just finalize, make sure they have the final touches on their restoration enhancement activities. And then that whole account is going to be closed and finalized and on to their other good things they're doing. The 10C is a corrective change that actually we as staff missed 2 years ago when we put it in bill. And I take the blame for that. We unfortunately put a wrong expiration on it, so this would put a correct expiration so they have the proper, the DNR and their core functions duties would have the proper allowed availability of funds, which would be until June 30th of 2031. And then subdivision 11 is a cancellation. It sounds a little odd, but there is a laws of 2020 appropriation to Heron Lake. They're not going to use the money. There's not enough work for them to do down there because landowners are saying, hey, we're just not willing, we're not interested in that for easements or for habitat work or whatever it might be. So they're going to cancel, the money will be coming back. This is to actually provide $120,000 of that to be canceled right now so that it can be used in the appropriation for subdivision 6D, which is core functions for this new list of appropriations. And the council had asked for that. Essentially, it allows us, just allows $120,000 so the council could round off the numbers and allow things to happen a little more routinely as we went through. Your nonpartisan staff may have comments on those too if you wish. They're aware of them as we've been walking through this. The final thing is at the bottom of the page, and that is there is an amendment to Minnesota Statute 97A.056. As you're aware, 97A.056 is kind of the guiding statute for Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, as well as outdoor heritage funds. It's the primary statute dealing with all of this. And what this does is, you may want to refer back to Mr. Stanley as well for his insights on this, but I'll call it a time-saving measure for lack of better understanding of mine maybe, or eloquence. And basically what it does is it says that any lands that are acquired with outdoor heritage funds can be used also as leverage for federal grant funds of related conservation programs like Pittman-Robertson funds, Dingell-Johnson sport fishing funds, North American Wetland Conservation Act or NACA funds. And whenever those grants are leveraged, there's duties of those funds that go onto those lands, meaning those lands have to continue to be used for conservation. What this does is it removes kind of a procedural ambiguity that previously would say, well, maybe you need to go back to the council to ask permission to do that. But it was an unsurety. So we thought, let's get this cleared in law. And this wasn't staff's idea. It really came as a collaborative discussion between DNR, the Commissioner's Office, as well as DNR legal staff, Lessard Sam staff, and nonpartisan legal staff from the House and the Senate. Mr. Chair, that's a quick overview for you, and I will stand for any questions you would like.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and we do appreciate the quick overview. Before we go on to member questions, we only had Mr. Johnson signed up to testify. Is there anyone else that would like to testify in relation to this bill? If so, please approach the table. Well, that was easy. All right. With that, I'll just open up with saying I just want to thank you, Mr. Johnson, and all the hard work you and your team do and the council does to put this together. So thanks for coming today. And with that, we'll open it up for questions. I saw Senator Green first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you'll be happy to know I only have couple comments and a couple questions today. Save the rest for the floor. I know you like that. First of all, I too, believe it or not, I want to thank Director Johnson because what he said about contacting his office is absolutely true. I ask him for information all the time, and it gets there very quickly, so I appreciate that. What you just said, just to clarify, first of all, when you're talking about the leveraging for federal grant, can you explain to me what that means? Does that mean like you can trade this land for something else, or use it as leverage to get more funding?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Green, what I might do is, if it would be okay with the chair, I'd like to defer that to Senate Counsel because then it comes right from the legal mouth. And then I can fill in further if he wishes.
Sure. Mr. Stanley?
Mr. Chair, members, Senator Green, the origin of this, and I'm going to get to your question, but I'm just going to provide some background here. If you look at 97A 056, subdivision 15, paragraph B, it says that a recipient of funding that requires an interest in real property subject to this subdivision may not alter the intended use of the interest in real property. That's not what we're concerned with here. Here's the language we're concerned with. Or convey any interest in the real property acquired with the appropriation without the prior review and approval of the council. And so what happens sometimes, and Mr. Johnson can talk to you more about the specifics of this, but Outdoor Heritage Fund money will be appropriated for a particular habitat purpose that will also then be able to be used to leverage federal funds. But as part of accepting those federal funds, there's often terms that have to be agreed to that, when you ask lawyers, look a lot like conveyance of an interest in real property. So for example, a federal grant, in order to get the federal grant, sometimes there'll be a term in there that says something like, this land must be used in perpetuity for conservation purposes. Terms that are consistent with what's required by the terms of the Outdoor Heritage Fund appropriation and the constitutional language and 97A 056. But technically, because of this language I just read in subdivision 15, the recipient of that Outdoor Heritage Fund money cannot take that step of seeking the federal funds without bringing it back to the council. And so there are times when a recipient will want to get as much conservation bang for their buck as they can, and that happens fairly routinely. And this language that you're asking about at the bottom of page 25 is just designed to make it so that they don't have to come back to the council every time they are maximizing their use of those funds. Does that answer your question?
Senator Green?
Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you. And I'll look into it a little more. And if I have any more questions, I'll contact you instead of hashing it out here. But, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator Green.
Okay, thank you. I've got two projects in here right now that I just had questions on that I thought I'd get to you. You know, because I know you guys have said, and I'm sure you do, you go through each one of these projects, you know everything about them. And Director Johnson brought up the big swamp up north. And so I have a question on that. And the reason I have the question is because I've heard from people in this area that are not willing to sell their land, and they're being pressured into doing that. And it's going to flood back some apparently considerable farmland if this thing goes in the way that it's proposed. And so did the council, or I'll ask you two questions on it. Did the council hear from any of the landowners? Did they seek out any information on that, first of all? And then in the book that you have in front of you, and it's on page 2/11, it says that restoring hydrology to the wetlands would be accomplished by going through the legal process to abandon the lateral ditches and refilling those lateral ditches. Can you explain to me what the legal process is? And then what I'm concerned with is that if anybody's been threatened with eminent domain on this, and I think that that's not proper for these funds, if I'm not mistaken.
Director Johnson?
Mr. Chair, Senator Green, thanks for that question. That's a really good one. As you know, when the proposals come in, sometimes the booklets, just show the proposal, and they don't get the paperwork, a refined paperwork of what happens after the council has made adjustments to that proposal and said, we're okay with this, we're not okay with this. When this proposal originally came in from the Rosa River Watershed District, they were looking at restoring about, what was it, 2 miles or something of Badger Creek, I think it was, as of the riparian area of that creek, as well as removing a bunch of, what do I call it, reclaiming some of the old ditch work in that bog, in the big bog up there, in the big swamp. The council, as they read the proposal, and then as they heard the presentations on the proposal from them, thought, you're not quite ready for prime time. As far as the ditches go and reclaiming the ditches and working in the bog itself, it just didn't make sense to the council from a standpoint that they were ready, or they really knew exactly what tact they were going to take. So the council said, the only thing we're interested in funding on this is the restoration of Badger Creek and those in that area that you're talking about, and which was, I think it's about 2 miles. I'm sorry, I don't have that right in front of, yes, I have it in front of me somewhere here, but it's not highlighted.
That's fine. I'll be talking to the landowners again after this. So.
Yeah, so there will be no, all this will be is a restoration activity within that aquatic floodplain. So it won't be any, and so which is already public land, or it's, as to my understanding, it won't be on private land unless it's within the public waterway, whatever that is. I think it's all on public land at this point, where they're looking at doing the restoration. There won't be any acquisition at all, so there should be absolutely no public domain or anything like that happening.
Okay.
Anything else, Senator Green?
I'm only going to get one more question because I want to get to the bills, and that is in Section 5. And this just kind of caught my eye as I was going through the book. It is 5E. Should my glasses. And it's, let's see, sanctuary watershed habitat protection. And the one thing that I saw here is that it's going to be going, or at least run through Wisconsin, Osceola, Wisconsin, looks like. And I think that if I remember correctly, the money has to be used in Minnesota. And so is Wisconsin going to be managing this, or is it some other thing that I'm missing?
Director Johnson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Green, none of the funds will be spent in Wisconsin. They will only be in Minnesota. It could be that the state of Wisconsin, such as the Wisconsin DNR, may have some interest in this as a partner because this is happening on interstate waters, or, I should say on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. But any activity that's going to be happening in Wisconsin would not be available for outdoor heritage funds unless it were specifically brought to the council's attention, such as there was one project that happened down in Lake Pepin with that years ago.
Okay.
Senator Green? Any additional questions? Senator Kunish?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that a lot of this, the monies and the funding that's coming for certain lands has federal dollars connected to them. Given the current issue at the federal government and the reallocation or the turning off of dollars, especially when it comes to environmental things, how would that impact any of this that's in this bill, or how would it impact any current projects that are being worked on where you need to have that either a federal matching or the federal governor, because federal dollars coming from the government to help with those projects? If it were to be turned off, what happens then?
Director Johnson?
Mr. Chair and Senator Kunish, a great question and very timely. Of course, as you know, we can't control what happens on the federal level, and so we deal with what happens. In the case, if it were a restoration enhancement project where the federal funds were absolutely necessary, let's take, for example, the Lock and Dam number 5, the carp barrier that you all passed last year, and then we're working on that right now with about $12 million of outdoor heritage funds. If the feds were to say, oh, yeah, we're not going to, we're pledging X number of dollars, and now we're going to cut all that off, so no, and if that was necessary for that enhancement to happen, then it would have to be at least put on hold, if not scrapped. The project manager would come to the council staff and say, here's our problem, that we would alert the council to it, and we'd work it through. Sometimes there's time within the appropriation availability to allow for those things, those snags to work through. Sometimes it causes us to have to add another year or two extension to the availability of funds. Other times it just means you stop and you start over. That seldom happens. But thankfully our federal partners, generally U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, pardon me, generally, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in most cases, and they really have been extremely consistent with the availability of their funds. But anything is possible. So with that, I'll also mention that from a leverage standpoint, we generally, our average has been that for every $100 of outdoor heritage funds spent, there are $33 of leveraged funds from either federal or local or private sources that come in as match. And that's over these previous 17 years now, or 16 years of appropriations. So we've got a pretty good average and a pretty good track record of those things coming through. I think generally the feds realize that if they want to see work done in Minnesota, boy, they got to work with outdoor heritage because things can happen that way. And we're really fortunate to have that relationship right now.
Senator Kunesh.
Thank you. Do you know if there are, and as you're talking, lots of questions are popping up in my head. Do you know if there are funds that are unencumbered at this time that you are expecting to come your way, but aren't sure if they're actually going to make it to Minnesota for those jobs? So have you encumbered everything that has been sort of promised or negotiated, or are there still funds sitting out there that you haven't been able to draw down safely into the state?
Director Johnson.
Mr. Chair and Senator, did you mean federal funds? Okay. I'm not aware at this point. I do not know that detail. I could burrow into it, but I'd have to go to each one of the project managers to find out. And I think there's a lot of guessing yet as to what's going to happen.
Members, any additional questions? Not seeing any. I do have two. I'm just curious as I look through some of the recommendations here, certainly some really good stuff. I see there's several that are, phase 11, phase 17, phase 13. Is there at any point where these phases come to an end and maybe another project comes to the top and can start their phase 1? Can you just kind of speak to that a little bit?
Mr. Chair and members, yes, good question. In fact, I think it's 94% of these are repeat phases. And the only reason the council entertains funding a repeat phase is if they've been doing good work and getting done what they want to get done. At times the council has said, we love you coming back for more money on the next phase, but you still have money in the queue that you haven't spent. So get after it and get it spent, and then come back and ask us and tell us what you've done with it, and et cetera. And I think the senators here would agree to that as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair.
Senator Lang.
I think that as the years have gone by and the Outdoor Heritage Fund has grown, and not only the land acquisition that we have, I think you're probably starting to see a change of attitude in the council when it comes to things like one-time funding, one-phase plans that, and we've seen an increase in probably the difference of applicants to where we've seen small, not small projects necessarily, but a county or a municipality that comes to the council and says we have this one phase project, where the council is more willing to say, we're not going to fund 55% of your project, we're going to fund it all, we're going to do it one time and it's going to get done. The phase 16, 17s, there has been some discussion within the council about how far do we go? Where's the then, right? Where do we get to the end of, I think, Metro Big Rivers, not to pick on them, but what phase are they on? 13, 14, 15? I don't know. It's up there. So when it comes to accomplishment plans and how the council looks at those projects, those are the questions we're starting to ask. Along with, and I wish Senator Green was sitting here because we started talking about when that constitutional amendment talks about ensuring, enhancing, and protecting, right? It's very vague. So the council has to try to look at what the intent of that was. And as we continue to purchase property throughout the state of Minnesota, one, we're going to start leaning heavier into PILT, right? Make the county and local governments whole. That's to my mind, and I think some of the council members would agree with me on both sides of the aisle, that is part of the protecting measure. And then also easements, we do a lot of easements. A lot of those easements are on private property that is not open to the public. That has been more and more contentious and I hate to speak for the whole council because I'm only one member, but that has been something where we start asking questions that just 5 years ago we weren't. If we're spending public dollars in a public forum, why is the public not able to use this property? So as we start delving into those things and looking more at the protection, not so much the acquisition, because we have acquired a significant amount of property, and that's maybe slowed a little bit as of recent when we start talking about or not just restoring and enhancing, but also that long-term protection. So that's a little bit inside baseball, a little bit inside the council, but that is kind of the discussions we're starting to have. And I think, I don't know if Senator Herr would comment on that any further, but the council is well aware that there are certain counties within the state that are, largely federally or state-owned already, and the tax base is so small that they are very worried about losing additional tax base and losing additional revenue in those counties. So it is an issue that we talk about.
Perfect. Thank you for that extra context. Just one more question, then we can move on to closing comments. I'm curious about your administration piece. How was that decided, the amount you guys get for administration? It seems low. I'm happy. You guys do a lot of work for not a lot of money. I think, the DNR typically, when they come in, it's like they're asking for 5%, and on 152 million, 151 million, they'd be asking for $7.5 million to do the same work. So how do you do it so cheap, and can you teach them? But seriously, I mean, how is that? How do you get to that number? I'm just kind of curious if you could speak to that a little bit.
Mr. Chair, that's a really good question, and thank you. I was raised by a private business owner who had to pay his own bills. I was raised to watch the pennies, and working for nonprofits for years, you really have to watch the pennies. And I have my own business, it was the same way. So I've just tried to follow through with what my predecessor did and make sure that we run skinny and run well, or run lean and run well. There will be a point in the future where we'll have to add another staff member. In fact, it probably will be within a year from now or a year from now. I'll have to talk with our council about that. But there's the staff I have are incredible staff, and they really are efficient. They know what they're doing, and they do it really well. So I'm just really thankful in that regards. Mr. Chair, two things that I would like to mention, if I may, really quickly. First of all, I referred to Mr. Stanley as the legal mouth, and I should have called him the legal oracle. My apology. The other thing is that there are always ideas that don't come to the council, because people just don't know, can I ask for that kind of money or not, or money for those things? I've had the pleasure of meeting with, over the last year, I know just in your district, the city of Grand Rapids as well as Itasca County, individually on different items to talk about ideas and potential grant requests for them from the Outdoor Heritage Fund. And I love sitting down with LGUs especially to talk about their ideas. If any of you have local units of government in your area that are interested, or that you can shift them, tell them to get a hold of us and ask their questions if they want to get in a proposal before the council. Council is always listening to, as Senator Lang said, new proposals. They want to hear about new, especially one-shot ideas. How can we get some money in new places? So That offer, please, is open on the table. We'd like you to take advantage of it, all of you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you again for all your hard work, and thank you for your accessibility to members and to our local communities. With that, I think we'll go to closing comments. We'll go to Senator Lang first, and then we'll let Senator, or Chair Her finish up. So go ahead, Senator.
Well, I appreciate it, and I just, I think, I don't know how many people within the committee know that this is Executive Director Johnson's last bill. So he probably didn't want me to say anything, but I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say a huge thank you for the responsiveness. There are some late night text messages about things that come across in the 3-ring binder. And there are extenuating circumstances where he has reached out and explained things, and the council deals with a lot more that the legislature just doesn't see. So, and from start to finish in my 8 years that I've been very proud to serve with him, and I'm just glad that, you know, I was able to do so. So with that, I just a big thank you to him.
Thank you. Senator Her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, thank you, Senator Lane, who has a little longer history in the council than I, and many times I will call him for advice, and appreciate him stand by me in presenting this bill. Although we are appointed bipartisanly, and also we appoint the citizen members bipartisan, but this is a Minnesota bill. It's a common sense bill. One thing that, is an old saying that Minnesota is nice, and depending on how you look at it, Minnesota nice, Minnesota ice, I think there's positive in both element here, and the reason Minnesota is nice is that we care about our environment. We make it nice and pleasant to restore, enhance, and protect it for our future generations. So this bill had project that's needed, and we did, as Senator Lane had mentioned earlier, we did question those who have more faces than the other to see whether it's ongoing needed, or whether it's, we should look at more of one-time project. And that's what the council is for, to vet it through the project so that our money, our tax dollar are accountable. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Hope you support this bill, and it will be laid over, I assume.
Yes. That is the path. So with that, with no additional comments, Senate File 770 will be laid over for possible inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to have 2 Senator Wesenberg bills. First, we're going to have Senate File 689, Bear Hunter Preference Points Accumulation for Youth Authorization, and Senate File 742, Use of Purple Paint Authorization in lieu of signage. So Senator Wesenberg will do 689 first.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wesenberg. Just go ahead whenever you're ready.
So I've got, 1 second here. So the first bill is bear hunter preference points. So in Minnesota, to bear hunt in about the northeast quarter of the state, from maybe mid-Minnesota, you need preference points to hunt bear. And what my bill would do is just say that if you are under 10 years old, so you have to be 10 years old to hunt bear. But if you're under 10 years old, you could start buying a license to start accruing preference points, because in a quota area, it takes around 5-ish years to have enough points to bear hunt. So if you, let's say you're 6 years old and you wouldn't have a license to hunt, but you'd actually just spend the money and get points. So by the time you're 10, then you'd be able to hunt. Whereas now you can't hunt till you're 10 years old, so you'd have to start buying a license, and you wouldn't be able to hunt bear until you're actually like 15. I've been talking with the bear hunters guides in Minnesota want this. I'm just going to read a part of a letter that someone sent me. Tim Humphrey, he's a bear guide up in northwestern Minnesota, outdoorsman. To whom it may concern, my name is Tim Humphrey. I'm writing to address the issue of youth hunting, bear hunting to be exact. For many years, I have been a guide in Minnesota. I've always tried to include not only my children in outdoor activities, but others as well, others children as well. Whether hunting, fishing, trapping, or camping, there was always room for another kid to join us. Currently, Minnesota law allows youth to get a free hunting license for big game at the age 10, 11, and 12, which is a great incentive to have adults bring youth outdoors. and continue to have them in our hunting heritage. In Minnesota, we have two types of bear hunting licenses, quota and non-quota. A quota is operated on a lottery system that allocates tags to those applicants with the highest preference points first, then issues remaining tags to those with fewer points until all available permits are given out for each prospective permit zone. Since 2002, the DNR has lowered the number of permits they're giving for bear hunters with hopes to increase the population and the quality of the bear in our state. As a result of the lower permit numbers, bear hunters have to wait as many as 6 years to draw permits in certain quota areas. And under current law, hunters can begin applying for the bear hunt if the hunter will be 10 years of age prior to the hunt start date of September 1st. Statistics show that if you are not exposed to hunting, et cetera, at the age of 15 to 16, they may never have an interest in hunting. So we're just really trying to keep kids involved in hunting. So this law would put, it says here on line 1.11, additionally, the commissioner may award points to a preference, toward a preference under this section to a person who's too young to bear hunt. So it's, you know, it's free money to the DNR, and it just creates an opportunity for children to go hunting and keeps kids in the outdoors, and keeps a good hunting, keeps a good heritage. So I hope it would be something that's not partisan and we could pass together, and it, you know, it doesn't hurt anything. It just creates an opportunity to get kids outdoors. So, any questions?
We appreciate that, Senator Wesenberg. Did you have any testifiers?
I don't know.
Okay, would anybody like to testify to this bill? If so, please approach the testifier table. Seeing none, we'll open it up for member questions. No, Senator Kunish?
I always have questions. Can you, first of all, explain what are preference points?
Yeah.
Senator Wesenberg?
I can, thank you, Chair, and Senator. So if I want to hunt, let's say I want to hunt up in Ely, and I apply for a bear permit, I would buy a license and say I want to hunt, I don't know what the zone is up there, but I'd say I want to hunt in Ely. I'd have to buy a license for about 5 years before I would be able to hunt up there. So it takes probably 5 or 6 preference points there. So that's, a preference point is a year, right? So every year I buy a license, or you're, I guess, entering a raffle. So it takes that amount of time to build up enough preference points to hunt in those areas. So. Cool.
So if I wanted to bear hunt up there, I would, every year I'd go and buy a license, and they accumulate, they add up.
Senator Wesenberg, or you?
Yep.
Thought you were done there.
Go ahead.
Yes, Chair and Senator. So, yep, your points accumulate. So once you get to like 5 points, then you would get a bear tag. So then once you get your bear tag, you start over again. So, you know, I'll just use 5 years. So every 5 years about, you could go bear hunting in those areas. There are no quota zones like in southern Minnesota and in like northwestern Minnesota where you can buy a bear license over the counter. But there are areas where it's a lottery system, kind of like doe hunting. You might only get a tag every, 3 or 4 years in some areas of the state.
Senator Lang has something to that point, then we'll go right back.
Yeah, I was just, maybe a little clarification for the committee. And you apply for a tag if you're not, so it's a lottery system, and there's only so many tags for how many applicants. If you do not get selected, you gain a preference point by not getting selected. So every year you don't get selected, you gain more and more preference points, and I believe 5 is the max. I got a 5 from the signal, yeah. So 5 is the max. There are a couple of avenues to get preference points. One being military veteran. When you get back from deployment, you get some preference points. I think they give you like 20, so they guarantee you a tag. But I think this is a good bill. I think it's something that, and I don't know if the DNR has really a comment on it or not, as far as getting young hunters in the field, right? It does tend to add a level of complexity to this that I don't think we really need. Maybe it's something along the lines of, yeah, please.
Looks like we have somebody approaching the table. If you want to speak to this, add some clarification for us, we'd appreciate it.
There you go.
Mr. Chair, members, Pat Rivers, Deputy Director of Division of Fish and Wildlife with the Minnesota DNR. As Senator Lang stated, as you apply for a license, you don't get it, you get a preference point. And we give licenses based on who has the most preference points. Generally, ages 10 to 12, we have about 300 kids who apply for a bear license, and the chance of them getting a permit is about 1%. Teenagers age 13 to 17, that success rate jumps up to about 7.5%. So speaking to this bill, this would provide more opportunity for youth to experience bear hunting in their childhood years. And we look forward to working with Senator Wesenberg to provide that opportunity for youth.
Senator Kunish?
So if a 10-year-old applies for a license, first of all, can 10-year-olds have a license for a gun or a rifle or to hunt?
Senator Wesenberg?
Yes.
Okay, so if a 10-year-old applies and their very first year, they win the lottery and their lottery number is picked, then they can go out bear hunting, is that correct?
Senator Wesenberg?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're in let's say you're in a certain quota area where it takes 5 preference points, you won't get picked. You maybe after 4 years, maybe, but I don't want to be misspeaking, so correct me if I'm wrong. But if it takes 5 preference points, you're not going to get picked.
Okay.
You won't.
And
Senator Kunish.
Just one more question. So do you think this perhaps sort of floods the pool, especially for seasoned hunters that have applied again and again and again and haven't had their lottery ticket pulled? Do you think this will sort of annoy them or upset them that they've been waiting all this time and now we've got all these 10-year-old kids that are applying and we're just never going to get it?
Senator Wesenberg?
Thank you, Chair and Senator Kunish. This is asked for by hunters, and they want to bring their kids in the outdoors with them and give them the opportunity to do this. I've had not one person say that they don't want this. That's a bear hunter. And I know many bear hunters, they just think it's a good idea. And we're not going to have 1 million kids applying. Like he said, there's 300 kids that apply for it, so that's a very small percentage. And, hopefully we can get more than that because that's still a small number. We have a good amount of bears in the state, so it's not going to harm anything.
Thank you.
Senator Kunish?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Any additional questions from members? Yes, Senator Johnson-Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are just opportunistic to get more information. First off, I'm wondering how much a bear permit costs.
Senator Wesenberg? Or if you want to phone a friend to your
let the
DNR testify.
answer. I don't know the exact amount. He might not.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I do not have the information in front of me. I've applied a number of years myself, and I'm waiting to be able to purchase one. I believe it's about $40, $45. A permit application is $5.
Okay, so I come from
Johnson-Stewart?
I come from a deer hunting family. I'm just trying to get the info here. So you apply for a license, but you can't actually go hunting unless you have a tag?
Senator Wesenberg?
Thank you, Chair, and Senator Johnson-Stewart. Yeah, so like you said, it's a lottery. So you enter a lottery for $5, and then that if you don't get drawn, you gain the preference points. Once you get drawn, then you buy the tag. So it'd be $5. Once you are drawn for a tag, then you buy the bear tag, which was, if it's $40, it's $40.
Johnson-Stewart?
Just one more question. So this is, so you can't hunt unless you have the tag, right? That's the issue?
Senator Wesenberg?
Correct, yes. So that's the issue. And so unless you have enough preference points in the areas where there is a quota for bears, you can't bear hunt. And
Just one last thing, and I could ask
Senator
you this on the
Johnson-Stewart?
floor too, I
Yeah.
guess. So if you're a little kid and your dad has a tag, you can't go with him unless, like if you're a brother, or it's not like deer hunting where you can have parties go out and they share tags. You can't do that with bear hunting?
Senator Wesenberg?
you could go with them. Let's say you're 6 years old, you could go with your parent, but you can't shoot the animal. I believe you can apply in parties of 4 to, depends,
I don't know how many for a bear.
I don't remember exactly. I know do you know? Does somebody
I think
know?
Senator Lang might be a bear
Okay.
hunter. He's got some extra context for us
Going
here.
on a
Senator
bear
Lang?
hunt?
So, speaking from experience on this one, preference points don't count for lottery applications and group applications. You can apply in groups up to 4. I don't think preference points count, and I don't know if I get a nod in the audience, but I don't think preference points count at all when you apply a part of a group, unless maybe if everybody has the same preference points, but. Okay, they average them out, yeah, so.
Yeah.
Senator Johnson Stewart?
I'm done, but I'm going to find you and ask you some more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional member questions? Not seeing any, I just want to say, you know, I do appreciate the intent of this bill. I know I've done a lot of work on trying to find ways to help get kids, you know, out in the woods and on the water, because too often they're on these devices we're all way too addicted to, and we need that next generation of conservationists to become hunters in our state, to buy licenses, to keep the wonderful things we have going here. So I appreciate what you're trying to do, and I fully support it. Senator Wesenberg, so with that, we'll give you the last comment, and then it'll be laid over.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. Yeah, I hope we can, you know, push this through and create an opportunity for, you know, kids to get out and hunt and enjoy the great outdoors. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, Senate File 689 is laid over for possible inclusion. Now we are on Senate File 742.
All right. All right, so this is a purple paint bill. I can't remember who brought this to me in the past, but I liked it because it just gives another opportunity to post private property. Currently, you have to post your property, I believe, if it's wooded, every 500 feet, if it's in the open, every 1,000 feet. But this would just give another, you don't have to do it, but it gives an additional opportunity to post your land, and it would make it easier for anyone out in the outdoors. If you're walking through, let's say you're on public property, and all of a sudden you see some purple paint, you know you're coming upon private property. Where if you have a sign, let's say, and here's my example. I have 40-acre parcels, but they connect at a corner like this. And this area right here is public. So if I had purple paint here and you're walking through here, rather than if I have a sign every 500 feet, so maybe 3 signs, or I would put more because it's hard to see, that I can just put purple paint, and then people would see there's purple paint and know that it's posted. So it's you don't have to do it, it's an option. I've been doing research on this. There's like 26 states that have similar laws. There's like 22 that have this purple paint law or about that, and there's some states that have a similar law, but it's just a different color paint. And it's apparently it's adopted because people like it, and it's not that hard to comprehend, I guess. So, and that's the bill.
All right, I see we have one testifier from DNR enforcement. If there's, I don't have anyone else signed up, but if there is anyone else that would like to testify after that, please approach the table. Otherwise, we'll move to member questions after this. Welcome to the committee. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Grecki, Assistant Director for DNR Enforcement Division. Mr. Chair, I'll keep my comments brief. The DNR is supportive of any changes to our current trespassing law that makes it easier for landowners and the public to be aware of where trespassing is allowed or not allowed. With that said, the DNR does have some concerns with this version of the bill that does make it difficult for the public to know where these boundaries are and difficult for officers to effectively enforce the law. As I'm aware, there's approximately 18 states, there certainly could be more, that have similar purple paint trespassing laws. However, their versions have some key pieces that our version is currently missing, such as requiring the paint to be visible, which is obviously very important, a minimum or maximum distance apart for trees to be marked for it to be lawful, and a reapplyment of the paint after some period of time to make sure it doesn't fade or wear off with sunlight, snow, wind, those types of things. With that said, the DNR is willing to work with the author or any other legislator to find a solution that improves their current trespassing laws, whether that's this paint marking method or any other versions which has been explored in other legislative work groups. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
With that, it looks like Senator Hoffman has a question, or maybe an amendment to change it to pink. Maybe more his color.
I absolutely, I'm sitting here and I have the wonderful Prince Purple Rain. You're gonna have to pay some, like, credits, royal credits to, you're using the word purple on this, so it'd be something. No, and seriously, I appreciate this bill. I was trying to be funny. My wife said, look, John, you're not funny, so I'm not funny. No, it never was, Nate. Is there something that we can add? Do you want to add these along the way, Senator Wesenberg, with the DNR saying the consistency piece? Because it made sense. I saw you shaking your head, so I'm all in. This is a good bill.
Senator Hoffman, this bill will be laid over for possible inclusion, so there will definitely be some time to continue to work on it. Senator Wesenberg, if you do have a comment to that, though, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and I think I agree. If there's things to work on, it's great. This is just this part, we can make it better. So if the DNR wants to work with it and make it so it's amenable to them, that'd be good. And I did add, and I know I was looking at some states, I still want to make sure like corners are posted. You know, it seems like maybe some places there aren't, you don't have to post corners. I'd still want to make sure we post corners so you know it's posted, but then in between we could use paint. So like I said, if you're walking through the woods, you see a line of purple, you know that you're coming upon private property.
Perfect. Senator Herr?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. One is the paint itself, you know, whether we can put into the language or something about environmentally friendly paint itself, and are we gonna be able to suggest to folks as of now, or, you know, enforce a way that they can use environmentally conscious paint?
Senator Wesenberg?
Well, there's definitely non-toxic paint, but I don't want to speak for law enforcement, but it would almost be impossible to say if it's non-toxic or not. Even under current statute, I can paint a board that says no trespassing, but you could say use non-toxic, but how do you know if it is or not? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying those are things that would be hard to know. We could encourage people to use non-toxic paint, and it does exist. But, yeah, we could put that in the bill, but I don't know that it would be enforceable, so maybe a suggestion, so.
Senator Herr?
Yeah, the other question is that I love the color purple, and it kind of represent Minnesota well. Yeah, you got one there. But what about folks that are color blind? Would they be able to see the color purple?
Senator Wesenberg?
I don't know if people can see the color purple. Do you have an answer for me on?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Senator Herr, yes, that is why purple is used. Generally speaking, I'm not a medical professional, but purple can be seen by people that are colorblind.
We all learned something today.
I didn't know the answer. That's interesting.
I just want to let him answer, you know, make him feel good.
Did you have anything else, Senator Herr?
I'm done.
Senator Johnson Stewart?
So my husband's colorblind. I don't think he knows purple from orange, but anyway. This reminded me of utility markings and what colors indicate out in the field when you're looking for gas or natural gas or what, anyway. The purple I think is okay. My suggestion is ribbon instead of paint, which I know sounds like it's something that's not going to last as long, but it is more discernible. So surveyors and foresters use ribbon often to cause a bigger kind of disruption in the view. I think paint sometimes is hard to see. And so, you know, something like police tape or caution. I mean, if this is a big enough deal, we could get ribbon. I don't want to be ridiculed for this idea, but I actually would consider like a special marking ribbon or something. My concern is just that the paint won't be discernible. I come from a hunter family. I did notice that you specify, I think, an 8-inch stripe, correct? So I think that's good. I also looked into reflective paint to see if there's non-toxic reflective paint. But that's my only concern. Again, coming from a hunting family, and I know how important it is not to hunt on land that has been marked, that if this is something we're going to move towards, I just want to make sure that hunters can discern it. And again, purple is typically used for just water and irrigation lines, so I don't think there's any opportunity for confusion there. I just really want to make sure hunters are able to discern it. That's it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Johnson Stewart. Any additional questions? Seeing none, we'll go to Senator Wesenberg for if you want to respond to that and then have your final
Chair, I'll
comments.
respond, and if he wants to respond as well. So I do have a thought. So like on my property, I have ribbon, and when it's windy, the ribbon sometimes is gone in a week because it's windy and it just breaks. But, you know, and I don't want to make this harder or difficult, you know, so this was just another option for, like, I think about my property. I can post my corners and just go spray. And like I said, I want it to be big so you can see it. And that's just my opinion on, I guess, ribbon. I'm not saying you're wrong. It just, in my experience, when you use that, it can disappear.
Mr. Chair, Senator, so one of the frustrations with our current trespassing bill is it has to be posted with signs, and sometimes people will rip those signs down. It'd be the similar type thing with ribbon or marking like that. Paint is obviously a lot more difficult to get off all of the trees than a strip of ribbon or some kind of tape would be.
Follow-up question, Senator Johnson Stewart?
No, I just want to say, you've convinced me. I see how ribbon is a bad idea. Please do not make fun of me for bringing that up. All right, thank
We don't
you.
hold it against you. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, final comments, Senator Wesenberg.
No, I just hope, if this will make it easier for people, I'm willing to work with the DNR on, the language to make it fit. Let's do something that works. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, and thanks for agreeing to continue to work on this with the DNR and stakeholders as it moves forward. With that, Senate File 742 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you, Senator Wesenberg. Next up, we have Senator Hauschild, Senate File 811. And it looks like we've got Mr. Spreck signed up to testify if you want to come to the table. Oh, excuse me, I guess we had it incorrect on the agenda here. It's Senate File 8. Okay. Oh, okay, never mind. It's correct on the agenda. Senate File 811. We just had the wrong one in our packet.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't know who to blame for having me have to hear this bill. It might be the former House chair. It might be Senator Wesenberg for not carrying the bill, or it might be you, Mr. Chair Eichhorn, for having the hearing. But in all seriousness, there was a change made to the Environment Omnibus last year that was slipped in during conference committee that made it illegal to consume beaver. And so we're just changing back to how it was in the past. Pretty simple. I think everybody should hopefully agree. And with that, I do have a testifier with me, Mr. Tim Spreck.
Thank you, Mr. Spreck. And then I will say that Mr. Spreck is the only one signed up to testify. If there is anyone else in the audience that would like to testify, please approach the table. We'll have you go after Mr. Spreck. Otherwise, we'll move right to member questions. Mr. Spreck, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Tim Spreck, representing the Minnesota Trappers Association. Senator Hauschild explained this bill perfectly. It is very simple. What we're doing is setting right something that was done either in jest or in the dark of night that should not have been added. It wasn't vetted anywhere in committee. It was never discussed. It just appeared. So let's make it right for these folks that are working hard to take care of nuisance beavers. If they want to consume beaver, let's let them have at it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do have a question right away before we go on to other member questions, and it might be for staff. You might be aware, Senator Hauschild, but my understanding is the legislation that was passed before also extended to other nuisance animals as well. Say, for example, my dad hates when all the geese are in his yard, and obviously he's got a lot of poop in his yard. Maybe he would like to shoot some of those geese, and, maybe he could get dinner out of them. I don't know. But my understanding was it did apply to other nuisance animals as well. Is that correct, or was I incorrect on my understanding? That's what I thought maybe staff would know for sure. I just wanted to make sure if it did extend to other nuisance animals that it was included in here that, they could be eaten as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Spreck might have something, but I mean, the language is pretty clear that it pertains to beaver. Yep. So.
Do we know, Mr. Stanley, if what was written before had applied to other nuisance animals? I'm just wondering, I don't need to change it today. I know this is getting laid over, but might be something we want to consider working on if it did apply to other nuisance animals as well.
Mr. Chair, members, the change that was made to the bill last year was a change to 97B.667, which is the statute that's being changed in this bill in Section 1. And that statute as a whole only applied to the killing of beavers. And so this change would only affect the consumption of beaver.
Perfect, thank you. That answers my question. I don't have any additional member questions. Okay, that's pretty simple. That was an easy one. Thank you, Senator Hauschild. We appreciate those. To you for final comments if you have any. Well, that was easy. With that, we will lay Senate File 811 over for possible inclusion. Then last on our agenda, we are going to have the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They are going to talk to us about recommendations for products containing lead and cadmium and PFAS 2025 report, and members do have a copy of that report in their packet. I don't know if you guys are going to have it on the screen or not, but it is in our packets. And just go ahead whenever you're ready. I know you guys know the drill.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kirk Kadelka. I'm Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and I have my colleague Peter Sendai here with me today. We're just going to quickly go over the report and just a quick summary. As you mentioned, you have it in your packet. We don't have any slides or anything prepared. So just in terms of a little bit in background, last year we were asked to provide recommendations on the use of lead, cadmium, and PFAS in 4 types of products. One is PFAS in upholstered furniture related to electronic and other internal components, PFAS in firefighting foam used in airport hangars, lead and cadmium in key fobs related to internal components, and then finally lead in pens and mechanical pencils. Just a reminder, these prohibitions were created due to the human health and environmental impacts associated with lead, cadmium, and PFAS. Just want to talk a little bit about those health impacts. Several PFAS have been linked to increased risks for cancer, liver disease, and other negative health impacts. And PFAS also negatively impact aquatic life and wildlife. Lead and cadmium can cause serious problems for brain health and human development, especially in children. No amount of lead is considered safe in children. And high levels of lead can cause behavioral problems, short attention spans, slower growth, and decreased coordination. While cadmium, which is often a replacement of lead, can cause vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, muscle aches, and organ damage. We just want to bring this up because as we look at whether or not to provide time extensions to these areas, we take them very seriously and wanted to make sure that we were doing it very lightly and because of these health impacts. The final point in context that's really helpful is many times when folks looked at these bills, they think of the direct exposure, someone touching or consuming the issue, the contaminant. These bans also have benefits in 2 other areas also. One is the actual production of these products and the use of these chemicals that provides safety and prevents release into the environment, but also safety for neighbors and the workers themselves. The second area is the disposal of these products and the introduction to our wastewater facilities or landfills where they potentially have very significant challenges. An example is an MPCA report funded by LCCMR, and the lottery proceeds showed that over the next 20 years to remove PFAS from wastewater and landfill facilities, it would be $28 billion. And as a result, source reduction to meet all of these needs, whether it's during the production phase, the disposal phase, or the use phase, is the cheapest and the best way to prevent health impacts. So in terms of those 4 areas that we looked at, I'll start first with PFAS in upholstered furniture related to electronic internal components. There are currently limited available alternatives for PFAS in many electronics internal component applications as it applies to upholstered furniture. However, new alternative technologies are in development. Some examples include the use of PFAS or lithium-ion batteries, circuit boards, and internal wiring. And for internal components, it can be ball bearings, lubricants, and other mechanical parts in upholstered furniture. As a result, MPCA recommends an extension for these specific products, components within the products until 2032. As you may know, the Minnesota law already prohibits the use of intentionally added PFAS for all products starting in 2032. This would provide these situations additional time, but still allow for us to move forward and remove PFAS from products. So while this recommendation or the report talks specifically about upholstered furniture, we do make this recommendation for all 11 categories, product categories that were in the 2025 prohibition, because we see similar situations. For instance, whether it's in cookware or cleaning products that are examples. The second topic we want to highlight is PFAS and firefighting foams in airport hangars. Just want to be very clear, we're only talking about a very small number here of 8 hangars in the state that use fixed firefighting systems that use PFAS containing firefighting foam. We're not talking about trucks or other instruments of delivery for this material, but rather the installed systems. And the reason is these airport hangar fire suppression systems cannot just drop in the new fluorine-free foam, also known as F3, or water deluge systems. Instead, the entire system needs to be taken out and replaced. As a result, MPCA suggests that establishing a January 1st, 2028 hangar transition date, that's another 3 years, for a potential for a 1-year extension, which would be reviewed by MPCA and to look at the environmental impacts and make sure they're protected and human health, and the State Fire Marshal for public safety issues. This is a time frame that we've been told will allow for the transition to these alternatives and not include future use of PFAS in firefighting foam. Moving on to lead and cadmium in key fobs and in internal electronic components, where we see the issue here is the lead solder that's inside the circuit boards for key fobs. MPCA, we have found a number of sources that discuss lead-free solders, whether it's tin copper, tin silver, or tin zinc. And many times these have their strengths and weaknesses, and different uses have better connections or better alternatives. As a result, MPCA recommends a 3-year extension for the key industry to implement these changes in lead-free solder. There are a number of other categories in the lead and cadmium law that was passed a couple of years ago, and we do suggest that similar extensions for lead solder be applied for those internal electronic components. The final item is lead in pens and mechanical pencils. All pen tips consist of a tungsten carbide ball that is made of brass, nickel, silver, and stainless steel. And most pen tips have lead as a result that exceeds 2,500 parts per million. Higher-end mechanical pencils may select to use metal components that also have lead. So after discussions with manufacturers of the equipment that make 90% of the pen tips worldwide, noted that we could change to non-lead alternatives. This was possible because they're already making non-brass tips. And although there would be some time needed to make this transition. As a result, MPCA recommends a 3-year extension to allow pen manufacturers to switch to these lead-free alternatives. Most pen manufacturers already have some type of production of lead-free tips and should be able to increase production to meet the needs in Minnesota. However, MPCA does not recommend any extension for mechanical pencils. There are a number of alternatives, including plastic mechanical pencils and traditional wooden pencils, and those who would like to use metal components could move to those without metal. Those are our 4 areas of recommendation. The one recommendation that we do have that crosses all 4 of these areas is if an extension is provided, the law also require progress reports from those industries every 6 months to see how they're progressing in these areas to make sure that we have compliance with the law in the future. Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for your time. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kudelka. We do have some testifiers as well. So if you are able to stick around in case there's questions, we would appreciate that. First up, we have Clean Water Action, and second, we've got Environmental Policy Alliance. Welcome to the committee. Just state your name for the record and go ahead and get started.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Ivana Stark, State Director of Clean Water Action Minnesota. I'm here today in response to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's report on PFAS in the internal components of products. I want to express my gratitude for the MPCA's work and deep appreciation for our continued partnership in the shared mission of protecting Minnesota's environment and water. Since its passage in 2023, Amar's Law has faced relentless attacks from the chemical industry and manufacturers, many claiming the law is unworkable while simultaneously lobbying for carve-outs. Instead of proactively complying, some industry players have failed to work as partners. A troubling example comes from a small motorsports business in Delano. The general manager shared 2 emails with me, one from Honda, dated December 20th, 2024, and another from Yamaha, dated January 3, 2025, just 2 days after the law took effect. These emails acknowledged the new PFAS regulations, but by then it was far too late for retailers to adjust their inventory. These manufacturers were aware of Amar's Law by mid-2023, yet they allowed Minnesota businesses to purchase inventory they would not be legally able to sell. This tactic unfairly placed the burden on small businesses, using them as leverage to argue that implementation is too hard and too costly. Minnesota businesses should not be blindsided. This is not a failure of the law, but of industry's refusal to prepare. Amara's law is strong, necessary, and entirely reasonable. If multi-billion-dollar corporations redirected even a fraction of the resources they spend on lobbying for the continued use of toxic chemicals toward developing safer alternatives, meaningful implementation would be well underway. Let's not lose sight of why this law exists. PFAS pose a direct threat to our water and our health. Excuse me. Exposure has been linked to low birth weights, lower IQ, reduced immune response, thyroid disease, digestive issues, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and reproductive health problems, including testicular cancer, preeclampsia, infertility, and gestational diabetes. These chemicals bioaccumulate, earning their forever chemicals label. And once inside our bodies, they can damage DNA, triggering the very health crises I just described. Excuse me. Momentum against using PFAS is growing. The chart on the one-pager supplied to you gives you a snapshot of the work being done across the country to tackle this toxic chemical. Internationally, the shift away from PFAS is well underway. Representatives from Japan and Australia have visited Minnesota, inspired by our leadership and seeking to replicate our success. As with any legislation, adjustments may need to be needed as new information emerges. That's not unusual. Clean Water Action supports efforts that strengthen implementation and protect Minnesotans. However, we urge against product-specific exemptions, exemptions without clear timeframes, and any attempt to weaken or narrow the impact of this life-saving law. Industries have the power to do this work, and asking for exemptions because it's inconvenient for them to protect Minnesotans isn't acceptable. Minnesota has led the way in the fight against PFAS. Now we must ensure this law is fully implemented as intended for our health, our environment, and for future generations to the best of our ability. And again, we deeply appreciate the MPCA's work to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there someone from the Environmental Policy Alliance for Automotive? Oh, it's remote. Are they on? Okay. Then after that, we have William Moran would be up next if you want to approach the testifier table. Catherine Palin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, just state your name for the record and go ahead and get started.
Okay. My name is Catherine Palin. I'm with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senators, for the opportunity to speak to you today on the MPCA's report on PFAS and lead and cadmium laws implementation. As I said, I'm Catherine Palin. I'm with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We represent the automakers that produce most of the new light-duty vehicles sold in the United States, their suppliers and technology and mobility companies. Vehicle keys and key fobs are covered by the lead and cadmium law. Auto innovators and our members have taken a deep look into lead and cadmium use in those keys and key fobs, and we provided the information we were able to collect to MPCA as they developed their report. I am, in fact, the author of the letter that MPCA referenced in their report on that issue. Auto Innovators recommends that banning lead and cadmium in keys and key fobs should not be a high priority, since exposure risk from those items appears to be minimal. With respect to electronic fobs, the lead that's in those fobs is in the interior electrical components that are not easily accessible. And then with regard to the minor lead content that's found in the brass of keys, many keys are plated with other metals to change their color, and the brass is expected to be on the interior of the key. There are other regulatory structures in place to minimize the exposure risks from keys and automotive fobs, and Minnesota's law is not consistent with those other regulatory structures. As mentioned in MPCA's report, California's 2001 settlement about lead content in keys effectively brought the lead content of those keys down to below 1.5%. At that point, warnings of risk to Californians are not required. In addition, the European Union's end-of-life vehicles directive governs the presence of lead and cadmium in vehicle components, including keys, and sets low thresholds for those substances' use. Auto Innovators recommends that Minnesota consider aligning standards for lead in keys and fobs with those provisions. Auto Innovators also disagrees with MPCA's recommendation for progress reports every 6 months. on lead and keys and electronic fobs. Auto industry parts like keys and fobs are carefully designed components, and exploration of alternatives will not be a quick process for the industry. And so we recommend less frequent progress reports, possibly annual ones. But Auto Innovators does recommend that at a minimum, the legislature adopt MPCA's recommendation of a 3-year extension for the key industry. In conclusion, Auto Innovators believes that amendments to Minnesota's lead and cadmium keys law will lead to more effective implementation of the statute and improved workability and feasibility of the law for industry. I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. With that, we'll have Mr. Moran up next, and then the representative from the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy after him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Writing Instrument Manufacturers Association. I'll probably be referring to that as WEMA throughout, just as an acronym. My name is Bill Moran. I'm a lawyer here in St. Paul. I provide legal advice and representation to WEMA and have been asked to comment with regard to the recommendations that were made by the MPCA on Friday. In Minnesota, there are over 50 million pens sold a year. And the processes to develop these pens, to develop the designs, the manufacturing processes for mass production, for sustainability of the and integrity of the writing instruments has been developed over many, many years. As we know, there is a small amount of lead that is contained in the tip of pens that use brass or nickel silver or stainless steel. And then with regard to mechanical pencils, again, a small amount of lead is found in the tip and then on the interior of the pen or of the pencil as a collar. The amounts of lead that are contained within those components would exceed or do exceed the MPCA's, or I'm sorry, the statute's limitation of 90 parts per million. The issue that I think is at the heart of this is the purpose behind the statute, 325E 3892, which was designed to take products out of the marketplace that present a health hazard, that contain lead and cadmium. In this case, we have developed studies, and this issue is this is not the first time this issue has come up with regard to pens in particular and writing instruments generally. The CPSC has passed some regulatory standards, and under the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, there are certain levels of lead limitations with regard to children's products. Back in the late 2010s, 2013 timeframe, there were studies undertaken to determine the lead content as well as the risk of exposure. Those studies uniformly determined that there was no risk of exposure to lead poisoning from those components contained, particularly in the tip of your ballpoint pen. And as a consequence, without any evidence to suggest that there is a health risk, 325E.3892, the statute that contains that lead prohibition, specifically generally defines school supplies, and within the purview of that definition would fall pens, and to a lesser extent mechanical pencils that we're talking about, which are used by drafters and architects and usually kind of in a higher level university setting. We have presented to the MPCA these studies. The European Union has also undertaken studies and determined to remove from the purview of their lead restrictions tips of writing instruments, such as the ballpoint that we'd see on a ballpoint pen. As I said, this is a small amount of lead that's contained within this product, and there are no health risks that have been determined to exist with regard to those products, and that involves ingestion as well as dermal exposure or touching. We presented that information to the MPCA, and that's nowhere mentioned at all in the recommendation. There's just a presumption that if it's lead, it's bad, and any level of lead is unacceptable. But the reality is, the purpose behind the statute was to protect against health risks. and all the statute is doing right now is not protecting against health risks with regard to pens and mechanical pencils. What it is doing is eliminating the opportunity for Minnesota consumers to buy the high-quality pens that they have been buying for over 100 years. What we're looking at as well is circumstance where the only outside source that the MPC consulted was this Micron, which is a manufacturer of equipment to produce these pens, or to produce these components, these tips. They certainly have a vested interest in wanting to see everybody retool. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind. The only information that the MPCA includes within the recommendations with regard to pens and mechanical pencils is anecdotal. We see very clearly from the report, from the recommendation, that the Micron has indicated it's possible. Possibility is a lot different than feasibility when you're talking about economic and technological feasibility. And in this circumstance, we submit, and we've told this to the MPCA, that it's not technologically feasible at this time to ramp up, even in 3 years. It's just not. And it's not financially feasible for the consumer, because what happens is that, and I guess the other thing is that Micron said, well, there are alternative materials. They haven't identified what those materials are. And the industry has been looking at this issue for a long time. And so without an identification of the materials and just a general sweeping statement saying, because you exceed the lead limitations imposed by the statute, it is automatically bad, makes no sense when you're eliminating a product that does not pose a health risk or a health hazard. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is a situation where if these alternative materials are introduced, which I think the report specifically admits presents problems, can cause damage to machinery, would take longer to produce, it's going to definitely affect the amount or the number of pens that will be made available to people in the state of Minnesota. This is the most comprehensive ban in the world. Minnesota would be the only state in the country, and to our knowledge, the only place in the world where you could not buy a ballpoint pen and a mechanical pencil as they're currently constituted. The only place in the world. And I think if you go back and look at the legislative history, this issue wasn't even discussed. I submit that pens and mechanical pencils weren't even considered to be part of this ban within the purview of the school supplies. We brought it to the attention of the MPCA to get clarity, and as a consequence of that, we would request that the committee here take into consideration these comments in exploring an exemption for pens and mechanical pencils. We've heard a lot of testimony about PFAS and other things that clearly have historical scientific data, scientific method applied in order to evaluate the health risks that are posed by those. And MPCA has presented nothing to suggest that pens and mechanical pencils, from a scientific perspective, pose those kinds of risks. Thank you for taking my comments.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the committee. Just state your name for the record and go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Eichhorn, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the report from the MPCA, particularly on the PFAS section of it. My name is Aaron Clems, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, or MCEA. MCEA is a public interest law firm and nonprofit advocacy organization with a 50-year history of defending Minnesota's environment and the health of its people. Since the passage of Amara's law in 2023, we continue to learn more about the pervasiveness of PFAS forever chemicals in our water, products, and bodies. These are not just forever chemicals, they are everywhere chemicals. And since they don't break down in the environment, every new use, every new product produced that contains PFAS is adding to the problem. That's why every delay in eliminating these chemicals and every exemption that's contemplated to Amara's law is a problem. The sooner we turn off the tap on continued PFAS production, the better, and the faster we can turn to addressing the existing pollution that's out there. The other thing that we're learning is how harmful even tiny amounts of PFAS are to people. Recent science continues to show that PFAS compounds, down to the smallest amount that we can even detect, contribute to cancer risk, and harm our immune systems, livers, and thyroids. Now, MPCA's task in managing this threat is really challenging, and MCEA appreciates the care that went into this report as well as MPCA's approach to this issue generally. Since PFAS compounds are so pervasive in our products, it's understandable that there will be challenges in unwinding our dependence on these chemicals. But direct exposure to these chemicals is not just about where they are located in products like electronics and furniture. People are also exposed to the water that they drink years after these chemicals are discarded as waste. And I was glad to hear Mr. Kudelka say something similar in his testimony. In just one example, the residents of the East Metro are painfully aware of this fact and are dealing with the consequences today. The nation and world is watching Minnesota as we confront the deadly legacy of these forever chemicals. We are at the center of this debate because we are where this toxic legacy began and where our people have been exposed for years. So while this committee considers this report and the legislature considers any potential legislative response to it, please keep in mind that we can never solve this problem as long as we continue to add to it. Thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. And with that, there's not a bill in front of us, but if members do have questions, I know the PCA is still here, so if anybody has questions about the report, we'll take those now. Senator Hauschild? Is your question for the PCA? I just want to get them coming up here while you ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of MPCA, for the report. I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about the process of engaging stakeholders, specifically on the lead and cadmium issue? From my recollection and understanding, the ban on those things was included in the 2023 omnibus, but it wasn't a standalone bill. It didn't have its own hearing, so it kind of was in the omnibus, and that was passed. And I'm just curious, since then or during that time, what was the engagement with stakeholders when it comes to those products?
Mr. Kudelka?
Mr. Chair and committee members, for the record, again, my name is Kirk Kudelka, Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The agency made the proposal in 2022 and had legislative hearings, and in 2023, which was part of our larger budget bill, there were hearings on there. We did talk about it. We did not receive any comments from industry at that time on the prohibitions. After its passage, we did do some outreach to some entities to make folks aware of the change in the law. We've had conversations, as mentioned earlier, with some of the industries in the meantime, even prior to the request for this report, to collect some information, really to see what is available in terms of alternatives and what industries are doing to move forward when we know there are alternatives. You know, what does it look like to make those changes? And then the report was introduced, and we have had conversations. We have in the report references to various letters we had received or letters we had received prior to the report that we utilized in our process to make our recommendations.
Senator Hauschild?
Thank you. With regards to keys, you know, and I'm not an expert on how this exactly works, but from my understanding, the ability to determine whether or not there's lead or cadmium in the keys has a pretty extensive process whereby the keys are melted down and it's determined what the makeup of the materials are. However, in the report, it's my understanding that you all did more of a surface level technology to determine among DHS staff a collection of keys to sort of determine what the lead amount in those keys were. So when you're telling industry to use one measurement or mechanism to find those contaminants, but then using a different one in your own study, doesn't that create a contradiction and perhaps a misidentification of whether or not there are alternatives?
Mr. Kudelka?
Chair and committee members, I think I just want to confirm, when you're talking about a report, you're talking about the 2024 Department of Health report?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Chair and committee members, Department of Health in 2024 did publish a report that looked at various types of keys, where it found that there were a number of situations where there were lead-free keys. They found 64% of keys had lead in them, and there was a much smaller percentage that was when we looked at just automobile keys. So the process they used is an XRF machine.
Right.
That is what we used for our compliance piece as our first step, is to determine whether or not there is enough lead there. It's our screening piece, depending on the results, and we found the results to be fairly similar using that machine compared to then the additional process to do the total metals test. And so that is part of our process that we use to do it, and we have found it to be similar along those lines. I think we're talking about key blades right now. Our report does not tackle the issue of key blades in the report, although the study done by the Department of Health does show that there are all alternatives that are in the market today that have key blades that do not have cadmium or lead in them.
Okay. Senator Hauschild?
So just so I'm clear, you are saying that there are commercially viable key alternatives, and you're not recommending any delay in implementation of that for keys?
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, we did not tackle that issue in the report.
Right.
So we don't have a recommendation in the report. We have some conversations. The industry has reached out to us recently, and we're collecting more information from them, asked for some information, and we'll be able to review that to determine whether or not, if we do have a different recommendation. But it's important to note there are keys without lead over the Minnesota's values currently in the market today.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Wesenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not exactly sure. Is the MPCA at stand now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I wasn't sure. And I don't know if this question's for you or who it's for, but so I guess my first question is the MPCA the organization that's doing the PFAS research?
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, could you elaborate a little bit more? Excuse me, what research you're referring to?
Well,
Senator Wesenberg.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So the information that's been presented to us and the PFAS that's in the products and the cancer causing, who came forward and said that PFAS is causing these cancers everywhere and all these diseases, where did that come from?
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, that is from a wide amount of literature that is published. The various, whether it's academic or others have done the work. In addition, our Department of Health has looked at that and set health-based values and identified that there are those potential risks because of PFAS that were mentioned earlier. So MPCA has not done the research itself. It relies on many other entities to do that work in our Department of Health to provide information on toxicology.
Senator Wesenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you said wide variety of published articles. I think those should be brought forward to us. Potential. I'm not saying that these things are good or where I'm going to go with this, but so I just called my wife, who's a physician, and asked her what the medical community is doing in concerns with PFAS and if they're looking into this, and they're not like alarmed. There's no rates of cancer increasing. They're not saying anything is tied to this. So that's why I'm saying if you're presenting me with this information, you have to give me that information. And you can't say there's a wide range of these things. So if there is, I'd like to see it, and then we can see that, right? If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So if it exists, I would like to see that information. And then if it is this problem, we need to then say, well, if the medical community isn't looking into it or doesn't think it's this issue that you're saying it is, and it is an issue, then we need to present that to them to make sure they're looking into it. So, but as she has spoken with other doctors and other people in the medical community, they're not seeing the same things that you're telling us. So, thank you.
Do you have any additional questions?
I don't.
Any additional questions from other members? All right, not seeing. Thank you for coming to give us your report today and filling us in. I know there's probably going to be some legislation forthcoming, so looking forward to continue the discussion with you as that happens. With that, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else, Senator Hur? No, thank you. All right, I think we're good. Thanks everybody for attending today. With that, we are adjourned.